Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
You look at the numbers, you're like, wow, it's crazy expensive. However, that's a market-driven number. Believe it or not, the median share of income spent on rent in San Francisco is lower than Los Angeles by a good margin. If you look at the median rent paid as a share of household income, Los Angeles is one of the highest in the state, despite having significantly lower rents than Orange County, San Francisco, or San Jose. Those rents reflect income in those areas. LA is an odd economy. It's a huge place with some very high income folks, but it also has a lot of low skilled, low income folks. Right. And those numbers get whacked out of proportion because of that here. So, San Francisco people can say that, but I can say right back to them, actually, your rents are high because you're making so much money.
But again, that's true where it's true, because there's a lot of people who are not making that. They're working as waiters or waitresses or, whatever it might be, or just low general workers. And then they get pushed out further and further out of the city.
By the way, waiters in San Francisco, they do pretty well for themselves. I'm way more worried about the cooks.
Okay, the cooks then, that's fair enough. Right, but that's what I'm saying. It's a lot of the time the things are, this is the great challenges that we're trying to look at a big thing that's impacting every small unit. And every time we do that, we're not speaking the truth to that person. Whether that person's up here or down there, it doesn't really matter. It's not really truth. And this is the problem I have with averages, with any of those averages thing is, but I've never met anybody who fits an average, because I've got things where I'm like this and things where I'm like that.
So, but this is how I talk about it. So when we're a data shop. If you get down to what Beacon Economics does, we're a data shop. We analyze data. We help people understand data. But when you say that word, understand data, what am I talking about that? Every bit of data analysis is basically taking a lot of data and trying to shrink it down to a few components that make it absorbable. Because human beings, mathematics, numbers, it's not innate.
It's not sexy.
Yeah, it's not about that too. That's a whole separate conversation. But look, our ability to recognize faces is so much better than any computer can ever be. How you and I communicate, you're constantly looking at my face and reading emotions and thoughts, and I'm doing the same thing. We have these insane systems that can do vastly more than any computer, but those systems don't apply to mathematics.
No.
So whenever you have a bunch of numbers, you gotta break it down to something that's consumable by the listener, by the reader. And sometimes that's the median, sometimes that's the average, sometimes it's running a regression or looking at quintiles. Everything we do with numbers is just a way of trying to make some sense at it. Yes. I talk about the median rent to income ratio, not because that implies to everybody, but remember, that's the 50% point. If that's falling, that means people are generally better off. Now, again, it doesn't mean there aren't some people being squeezed. No. And by the way, in the context of San Francisco, it's not so much that those people are there, but they're being forced to move. They're moving across the bay, or they're moving out to the Central Valley, or in a lot of cases, they're moving out of state.
Well, a lot of them are moving to Austin.
Well, actually, Austin's pretty damn pricey right now, too, to be honest with you.
No, but it's not because it's become the new tech center.
Where they're moving.
It's become the new tech center. So they're going there out of the tech world and another tech world. But again, it's doing the same thing. It's inflating there. It's the same thing. So,
but the other thing is, too, and again, this is not to excuse what's going on.
No.
But we also have to acknowledge, and you already said it. I was actually in Seattle a couple days ago doing a talk for a group up there, and they were talking about housing costs. And I started laughing. I'm like, well, first of all, I'm from California. All right. But even more specifically, this is what I told the folks in Seattle. The reality is any hot economy in the world, any economy that has that is tight, dense urban markets with lots of money running into them, you end up with very high housing costs.
Yes.
That's just a standard feature of these kind of economies where productivity and it goes so high and wages go so high, you just see costs of housing go through the roof. And you talk about that, that's true in San Francisco. By the way, San Francisco is roughly on par with London. Mm-hmm. It's, again, Vancouver, kind of on par in that same category. But even move outside of that plane. It's interesting, I have a good friend of mine who now runs a business in Bangalore. And he was in Los Angeles for business. I hadn't seen him for years. We sat down, we start catching up. We start showing pictures of our homes. He's got a beautiful home in Bangalore. Looks a little bigger than mine. It doesn't have quite as nice of a view. We're just comparing, you know what? Exactly the same price. You go to Moscow, exactly the same prices. You go to Tokyo, same prices. And what you see is this is just a common feature of all these high-end, super dense, urban, rapidly growing economies. This is just part of it. And I think that that's something to recognize as being just sort of fundamental to these kind of economic systems. And while we have to at some level worry about those who are hurt by that, at the same time, we also have to kind of accept that this is just how the system works.
Sure. And, you know, I'm certainly not a big fan of miserableism. But at the same time, you know, like you said, we got to recognize some things. And at the other side, I'm with you in the ubiquity of certain things has made life better and opportunities more available. The ubiquity of these things has said, you know, like you said, I can shop on Amazon and I don't have to get on the bus in the rain if I'm a single mom. And at the same time, one of the things I wrote about in my last book about millennials, I said, you know, there's a crisis in keeping millennial talent, and that's because with a URL and $20, I can start a business, right? If I'm a millennial, back when I was a kid,
doing that business, right? That's a separate conversation.
But many of them can and do. Many of them can go start a business that is selling on Amazon, and they can start with $40. So the opportunity to generate income is also more ubiquitous. There's availability. The availability of being able to do gigs and have gig economies and all those kinds of things. All those things are fascinating to me, and they're a potential.
But it goes back to economic opportunity and how good it is right now.
Yeah,
it's funny. There's been a lot of controversy here in California about Uber and Lyft, and there's a lot of complaints. You know, in fact, we passed something called AB5, which is supposed to force Uber and Lyft drivers to become employees of those companies, as opposed to doing what they're doing right now, which is, you know, just kind of giving people an opportunity to make some side money. And the terminology used by the left to deal with these folks basically calls these folks exploited. But when you actually dig into the data, it's very interesting. You'll find your average Lyft or Uber driver is driving 5 or 6 hours a week.
Right.
And the reason that number is so low is because people come in and drop out of the system whenever they want.
Yeah.
You're a student. You need to make a few extra bucks to buy your books. Hey, what the heck? I'll go out and I'll do Uber for a few hours this weekend. You're a mom and your kids are away at camp. I'll go out and earn some money for a couple days and you know, save up for a birthday gift for them or something like that. To me, sheer genius, Uber and Lyft, because their ability to take millions of people who are going to work odd hours and turn it into one of the best transportation systems you could hope for.
Yeah.
Sheer genius.
Yeah.
And yet people want to turn it off. Oh, they're being exploited. No, they're not. No,
I don't agree with that at all. But again, that to me is this argument around the ubiquitous availability of ways to make money that you couldn't have done before. If you wanted to, in London, you know, to learn the knowledge, which is what it's called, the test to be a taxi driver, takes years and years and a huge financial investment to get that cab license. Now you can drive Uber.
Yeah.
Like,
and you don't need
this
that
is
training
off,
anymore
but,
because you have Google Maps, for God's sake.
right. So it's like, come on.
Come on.
Right. So,
Entry. It's not.
So a lot of the things, you know, a lot of things that I see the struggles with, and you and I touched on this last time, and I want to come back to it because I think it's important. There's a lot of predictions that 40% of jobs will disappear to AI, and my answer to that is, okay, if that's true, did 40% of horse and buggy business go to cars?
Of course.
Right.
And so it. Go the next step. If you went back to 1870 America, where half the population worked on farms, and you told them, by the way, 98% of these jobs are going to be completely eliminated, they would freak out.
Of
Just
course.
like people freak out when they hear that nonsense today. But then you would say, hey, don't worry about it, because people are going to be website programmers. A what?
Right.
They're going to be Uber drivers. A who?
Exactly.
But
it's this psychological desire to hold on to what's comfortable and familiar rather than the moving forward. I mean, this is my opinion, not the truth. My opinion, this screaming and shouting to protect coal miners' jobs is nothing short of bend me over, because, you know, this is stupid up the yin yang.
I laugh about that because, you know, as a kid, I remember reading books about people who were raised in coal towns, and the term they would use for somebody who managed to get out of that coal town, they would say they escaped.
Exactly. Right.
And now we're making those sound like good jobs.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is insane. So, you know, I was born in the UK. I've been gone for more than 40 years, but I was born there. I was there during Harold Wilson, Edward Heath, Maggie Thatcher.
Yeah.
I remember the 4-day strikes because of electricity. I remember the oil crisis and what was going on with Iran. I remember those things very well. And I also remember the miner strikes, the coal miners strikes. I remember the steel shipyard strikes. I remember Sheffield Steel and it disappearing. Well, hold on a second. Did Sheffield disappear?
Yeah.
No, it actually became rebranded. It's now the art center of the UK. All those places were turned into artist lofts. Art is a big center there. Stoke-on-Trent, which was pottery, which has now gone to Japan. The economies, this is one of the things that's why I wanted to talk to you. It's one of the things I'm fascinated with is this desire to hold on to the economy in the form in which I know it, rather than it evolving.
Or the neighborhood and the way you remember it. The resistance to change is enormous among humans. And I think one of the odd pressures of technology is it's speeding up change to the point where people are almost just, they can't even deal with it at some level.
Absolutely.
Right? It happens so rapidly. But change is always, it's very typical of the housing debates here in California, where people scream and holler about new investment in the neighborhood and the traffic and this and you know, and you go, wait a minute, you want this neighborhood to be frozen right now? Because I can tell you this neighborhood's different than it was 10 years ago. And it's different than it was 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. And this idea that somehow or other right now you should stop change, well, that's very arrogant of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you wouldn't have this if the generation before you had the same opinion.
Absolutely.
It's very selfish of us.
So let's go to a bigger picture. There are a couple of places I want to go while we're still on here. And first of all, there's a lot of hinting that we may be on the brink of another recession, which would make sense in the ebbs and flows of economies, because that is what happened.
No.
Well, I mean, don't economies go up and economies go down?
No,
right?
No. Hang on. Back up.
Okay, good.
Because that is exactly wrong.
Okay, good.
And too often people say that. Why are we going to have a recession? Well, this has been a really long expansion. It feels like we're due for one. Well, that's like saying, I haven't gotten a speeding ticket in a couple of years. I guess I'm due for one. What if you're not driving fast? Right. If you're not driving fast, you're never going to get a ticket.
Okay.
So when you think about recessions, they are the anomaly. They're not the rule. They don't just happen. There has to be a shock. There has to be a reason. Anybody who says we're going to have a recession right now, and my question for them is, why? What imbalance, what shock do you think is going to derail the current expansion? Because I don't see it in the cards. Now, mind you, back in 2006, when I started Beacon Economics, we did my first official forecast. When I left my previous job, my first independent forecast, August 1st, 2006, I stood up in front of a group of people and I said, real estate's a disaster. It's going to start collapsing and it's going to cause a massive recession in the US economy. And that's because back then, the imbalances that were forming were so obvious if you were willing to look. We were overborrowing, we were overspending, we were overbuilding. This was a nation running on subprime fumes.
Yep.
And it was only a function of time until it crashed. I look at the US economy today, I don't see any of those things in place. What I see is a bunch of people who want to run around and claim there's going to be a recession because it helps them get elected. It gets people to watch their TV show. It gets people to pick up their silly paper and read it. It's not real. It's just people trying to get attention.
So, all right, let's take that a little bit further, because can we talk a little bit about the national debt, which according to a Pew report is now bigger than the GDP. And it's estimated, I think it was 21 plus trillion.
That's gross debt, not net. That's gross, not net.
Gross debt, yeah. That's so.
40% of that debt is owned by the federal government, by the Social Security Administration or the Federal Reserve.
And that's always the case, though, right?
No, actually, so much of that debt's being held by the Social Security Administration because of some rule changes that occurred under Clinton and Gore back in the day. But putting that to one side, the point here, it's funny, people talk about, so this is another one of these misperceptions about our economy.
Sure. That's why I was looking forward to this conversation, because I know that we, because I'm a member of the public, I'm not an economist, that we are slapped around left and right, slapped around with perspectives and ideas, and they're backed up by these facts that I'm not sure are true.
Yeah.
And I don't have enough knowledge, and that's why I was looking forward to this conversation with you.
The debt problem is real.
Yes.
But how we describe the debt problem is completely wrong.
Okay.
Now, go back to what I just said. True national debt, net debt, is somewhere on the order of 12, 13 trillion dollars. Okay. That's actually external to the federal government, owned by investors. And because of these low interest rates, actually, believe it or not, the debt burden on the federal government today is lower than it was under Reagan. So that really isn't the issue. Okay. The real issue is the fact that we have made promises to retirees in the United States that we don't have no ability to pay in the future. Right. It's the unfunded liabilities that everybody should be panicked about, because Medicare and Social Security in its current form cannot be paid for. And what's going to end up happening over the course of the decade is you're going to see that federal deficit get wider and wider, not because the debt doesn't exist, but that deficit becoming wider and then becoming more reliant on the bond markets is a function of the unfunded liabilities becoming funded liabilities. Right. So the problem's there. We already know it exists. And the idea that you can measure that problem by looking at the amount of outstanding federal bonds, you're missing it completely. You're talking the wrong story. Forget all that. Let's talk about Medicare and Social Security. Systems that were built when people had an average life expectancy of 68 years, not 86 years. Right. A period of time where healthcare was significantly significantly cheaper than it is today, largely because they didn't have all these life-extending procedures they currently have. Right. The story has to be, how do you fix Social Security and Medicare? And part of that may be more revenues. Part of that should be a reduction in expenditures, whether it's cutting back on benefits, means testing, or raising, God forbid, taxes. Retirement age. Retirement age. Right. Yeah, it's the most obvious thing in the world. And yet somehow if you say that to a boomer, their head starts spinning around, like out of The Exorcist. It's like, come on, people. The system wasn't built for this. But well, I mean, let's just pause that for a minute, because people can't even talk about it.
Let's pause it for a second, because I think that people don't realize that retirement age is a new idea. Yeah. Like people actually think, oh, that's always been the case.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Like I was shocked when I did that research about 10 years ago. I was like, oh, retirement's not been around very long. You worked until you dropped dead.
40-hour work week. Nor have weekends, for God's sake.
Well, yeah, but I mean, at least those are a longer out. But retirement is actually very new.
Yeah.
It's, in the context of lifespans, that's not that, it's not that long ago that people didn't retire. And what is it? Also, the other side of it is, I know, because I do a lot of work with high net worth family businesses. And what I hear is that a lot of the time, I don't want to leave my work. Why would I want to retire? I have no interest in golfing for the rest of my life or going on bloody cruise ships. I mean, that's nice, but they actually enjoy their work. There's a desire to
share that opinion with golf courses and cruise liners, but just
yeah, they might mess with their economies.
Exactly.
So, all right. So now we come to another piece for me, which is very interesting, which is you and I are obviously students of what's going on in the world around politics, and we're seeing what is clear to me a rise in authoritarianism. And I think a lot of that is a backlash, not the truth, a backlash to a lot of what has been seen as globalism. And so this desire to, in the conspiracy world of New World Order, in a global economy, which takes us into the next part that I want to go into, which is Bitcoin and blockchain and a universal currency. So do you think that globalism and this idea of a global economy is what's got people freaked out, or do you think it's something else what's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I live in America, which is, we're not very global. I mean, for all the worries about globalism here in the United States, we are shockingly insulated from global flows. Imports and exports are a very small share of GDP, say, compared to a place like Germany.
Right.
The vast majority of things we buy are services, which are supplied by the person down the street, not by somebody in China.
Right.
So it's funny how people worry about globalism when really we exist in a world that's probably less influenced by those trends than anywhere on the planet. I mean, it's appalling what share of Americans still don't have a passport. That's how. Believe
me, I know.
Yeah. So to me, it is funny that we talk about globalism in that particular way. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is it globalism per se, or is it simply the fact that there's always some fear out there that can be exploited, that people just are inherently suspicious at some level, and people who want to manipulate the system for their own gain will try to find those pressure points and exploit them accordingly. You could talk about globalism, you could talk about income inequality, the way Bernie Sanders talks about it, or housing. In all these cases, you talk about people creating fears where there's no there. And that just seems to be how it works. If it's not this, it's something else. You find the same things. You go back in time. I remember reading stories about 1000 AD, and we hit the millennial, and there are theories that, that's when we were going to have the Armageddon, and that was going to be it. And there were riots in the street in 1000 Europe. Cities were burning because everybody's freaking out about this date. So if it isn't globalism, it's the apocalypse. It's always going to be something, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there'll always be people who will leverage fear. There's no doubt about that. And they'll do that for economic reasons, mostly for their own economic.
President Trump.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So how do, I'm listening to you and I hear something that might be heard right and things that might be heard left. I'm not saying they're true. I'm saying they're heard that way. Because, we're in this economy that we're in.
Yeah.
Trump likes to claim it was him who did it. Yeah, I personally have some doubts about that.
Yeah, you can have a lot of doubts about that.
Right. do you think that you said you don't see a recession coming, but do you see that this behavior, this political instability, this potential, you talked about something really rocking it, would an impeachment do that? Could that have a massive impact on the economy?
I wouldn't think so. The U.S. is a consumer-driven economy, right? Almost 70% of all spending here is from household spending on various sorts of stuff. And until you get to something that can actually hurt the consumer, that it's going to make them pull back on spending, I don't see it happening. Now, what can cause a consumer to pull back on spending? Not an impeachment. It's losing your job. It's not being given credit. It's got to be some other shock to the real system. There's never been a confidence-created recession. Ever. Let's just go down this road for a minute. Is it also possible, you're talking about the consumer pulling back from spending, but I had this argument back in 2007, is the consumer pulled back from spending because they're told there's a recession? No. Okay. So if CNN comes out and Fox comes out or whoever it comes out and says there's a recession, that people go, ooh, you don't think they start? Because I'm hearing nervousness. Yeah, but see, you got to understand that economic statistics are lagged. I called, again, I will say this, I called the Great Recession. I truly did.
You did. Yeah.
And
that's why you're the psychic Sue of economics.
I'd like to say to people, I've actually I started my business in 2006. It's now 2019. I've made 3 forecasts: recession, recovery, steady as she goes. That's it. And by the way, I've been right all 3 times.
Right.
So I like to, I'll just be honest with you. That's where I'm at. Now, with that in mind, God, I forgot the question.
If the media tells us the recession.
Yeah. And so, again, you look through the past and, I'm sorry. Yeah, I remember where I was going with this. Okay. So the point here is this. So the recession technically began, that's when it was dated by the NBER, December of 2007. Okay.
Yes.
For the first 6 months of 2008, I was actively engaged in debates with all sorts of other economists who were poo-pooing, saying everything was fine, right? No one even acknowledged that. Oh, that was a little slowing, no big deal. But then as the data started to mount, and we started realizing, oh no, this is more severe. Even go the next step. What causes every newspaper to start screaming recession? Well, typically a big dump in the stock market, right?
Yep.
The stock market goes, we're told all the time, the stock market knows all, sees all, it tells you everything you need to know. The big stock market decline in the Great Recession occurred in September of 2008, 9 months after the recession began.
Yes.
So no, people don't talk about it. Let me go to the next step. When you start worrying about the next recession? When everybody stops talking about the next recession. That's probably when you need to start panicking.
That's a really interesting point. So, Chris, I'm loving this, and you and I could go for a lot longer. And
I'm sure we can. It's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. We didn't get to talk about blockchain. We didn't get to talk about Andrew Yang and Elon Musk and $1,000.
Well, maybe we can do it again sometime, Dov.
I would really like that. It's been enlightening, and I think it's important for people to grasp that we. I still see this. I'm concerned about this at every possible turn, is that we are manipulated into seeing facts from the lens that is the preferred lens of the speaker. And that's why I really, I was looking forward to this conversation, because, you immediately challenged, when you and I talked, you said, well, what about this? I was like, okay, I'm going to go away and do the research. And that was really good. And because one of my things I've said all along is our challenge is not that they're right and we're wrong. The challenge is that I'm not willing to see if I'm wrong and where they might be right. And social media has given us this filter where it gives me more of what I believe. And that's a problem. You know, there used to be a time when I didn't believe the things, but I saw it on the BBC and I could trust the BBC. Right. And I went, okay, I can look at that differently now. But now I can.
You can go the next step. It is truly interesting and scary that we live in a world of almost unlimited information. This should be the time that people are able to deduce the reality from the noise. But quite the opposite, the information age has given us simply more noise. Yeah. It says a lot about who we are.
It really does. And that's why I said to somebody recently in a conversation, you know, the reason that Google is so big, I mean, you know, there's a lot of business reasons, but the reason it's so big with people is because we're overwhelmed with knowledge. And it says you can have less knowledge that's appropriate to you. The problem is it now gives you 1 million answers.
Right.
Right. And what's more is now we're being shown that the algorithm gives you answers that you'd prefer. It's the same shit in a different pile.
We have to take responsibility at some level. We have to take responsibility for trying to figure out the truth as best we can, not just rely on somebody else to tell it to us. That's the best lesson I can tell anybody is go out. There's ways of teasing out the truth, but you do have to make that intellectual investment. And that's the part of this. We're so overwhelmed. We're so overwhelmed with everything that it's just too much. And we just don't have time to make that investment. Well, you need to. You need to make the right decision. Because our inability to have the proper conversation today will come back to haunt us. We'll look back at this time, 2018, 2019, 2020. We'll look at these years, and we'll say, what were we thinking? Mm-hmm. Ignoring the true problems, inventing problems that don't exist. What was going on?
Yeah. That again calls for a great further conversation. Chris, as we finish off, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to tell us where our listeners and viewers can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources. Yeah. But before I do, please, I always like to ask my guests to share one piece of practical advice based on what it is that you're sharing that you'd really like for people to go out there and put into action, preferably in the next 24 hours, to get their head on about what it is you're saying.
One bit of advice. Wow. I got lots
in this age of way too much information.
I tell people this. If you don't ask the right question, you're never going to get the right answer. Right. It sounds kind of odd, but you know, I think about things. For example, healthcare in the United States, and we go on we've spent an hour on that. But all these fights over healthcare in the United States are all wrapped around who's going to pay for healthcare. No one asked the right question, which is, why do we pay so much more on healthcare than any other country in the world? The problem in the United States is we ask the wrong questions. Find the right question, and the answers are pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. It's the question sometimes that's more difficult to figure out than the actual answer.
Yeah, it's like what you said about surveys. If you ask the question that you are setting people up for an answer, and oftentimes I think we do that with ourselves. You know, we ask questions like, you know, do you think all men are assholes? Well, there's a lot of presumption in that. Listen, Chris, this has been awesome, mate. I am so grateful to you for taking the time. Please share with our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources that you have.
The easiest way is our website, beaconecon.com, Beacon Economics.
Beaconecon.com. Again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and honor having you with us. And we will make sure that we post the link to beaconecon.com, and we will also share that in the show notes with everybody else. And I'm going to encourage everybody to listen to this show, watch this show more than once. Take the time to actually let it not be background noise and really challenge you. You know, you hear me say this every day, stay curious. I challenge you to stay curious about the presumptions you have about things, and maybe you've inherited miserableism and you need to take a look at some other things.
Figure out what the right question is.
Exactly. And you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going to Facebook or LinkedIn and looking for our groups in there. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you want to find out more about me, Dov Baron, and how to hire me as a speaker or strategist for your organization, then go over to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Be aware that the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies are faced with exactly the same challenges you are, spending time, money, energy developing top talent, only have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're frustrated with investing and training your top talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, and come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing this show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about whether you are actually asking the right questions when it comes to the economy and your part in it. Because as Chris said, we all have a responsibility, and that is personal responsibility to what's going on. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.